Okay, so we're back with the second part. Now that we've fixed some of our technical issues, the second part of our episode on dating. And when we last left off, Fallon, you were telling us about something that happened on your wedding day. What was that?
Yes. So my wedding day, we were talking about how a lot of witnesses feel like once they're engaged, that they are just locked in, like they've passed a point of no return. So one thing that I will just always love about my mom is on my wedding day, when I got married the first time in 2003, it was literally 5 minutes before I walked down the aisle. I was in my dressing room. All my bridesmaids had left the room. It was just her and I.
Hmm.
And she said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And at first I assumed she was kidding. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, I'm being very serious. Are you positive you are not having any doubts? Like you want this?" And I still kind of thought she was joking. And I said, "Well, what do you think I'm gonna do? Like run out the back door?" And she said, "I'm just asking you because I don't want you to feel like just because all these people are here or just because you're in your dress or, we're, it's almost showtime." She said, "If there's any part of you that does not want to go through with it for any reason," she said, "you, number one, you don't have to explain." She said, "You just say the word. Me and dad will handle everything. We'll dismiss the guests. We'll, say what we need to say. No one, like, she basically was just giving me an out if there was any like qualms that I had. Um, she didn't want me to go through with it if I really didn't want to, under duress. And she didn't
Yeah,
want me to feel pressured to do it just because, we had all these guests and, people would be disappointed and everything. And we talked
right.
about that years later. And even though she really liked my fiance, she said that she felt something in me that apparently I didn't even recognize that
Wow.
was having doubts. So I'll just always love her for that, that even though it would have been
Yeah,
extremely awkward for them to,
yeah.
suddenly tell these hundreds of people, "Hey, there's no wedding." And there would have, of course, been like repercussions from the congregation. Like she was still willing to do that. Um, and that's just, I love that about her.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you do feel completely. I remember my wedding day. I was like, okay, I'm taking the plunge. I didn't have doubts about getting married to Rebecca, but I did. I was just like, wow. There's definitely a sense that this is well past the point of no return. You can't possibly
Yeah.
pull the brakes up on this now, and that's cool. She wasn't like that. Well, after I know we talked about a couple other things. I remember after I left. I don't know. I know this probably wouldn't have been a thing for you because as a man, when I left the cult, I found myself kind of uh, being a bit sexist in the way that I approached dating. And it wasn't just a hold the door and pay the bill. I wasn't talking about that. I'm saying that I was actually looking for a structure like I would have had as a Jehovah's Witness, where the man is in charge.
Yeah.
He handles, the finances. He handles, makes the living. The wife stays at home, and some people want that traditional thing, but the way Witnesses do it, the woman is subservient and secondary, and it wasn't even something that I was into. But it made me, after I left the organization, actually look for somebody that needed to be taken care of.
More
And
submissive personality type.
submissive, yes, but then yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, but then the symptom, or the result of that, was that I ended up looking for people that needed to be taken care of, because I didn't know, if I'm not running the show and taking care of the bills and the household and running everything, then I didn't know what my usefulness was. I didn't know what
Right.
my role was, and what I was offering, and it tainted the first couple of relationships when I tried to date somebody, and just couldn't quite. I was dating a woman in 2021, and she had her career, and she had everything really sorted, and she didn't need anything from me. And I just kind of felt a little bit adrift. And like, what's the deal? What do I do? What do I do with this girl? I'm not running the show. And then I slowly unclenched that, and realized how to, how much better and how much less stress it is just to be even partners.
Yeah, they focus so much on headship for men, but not that
Hmm.
much on partnership. So they they
Right.
miss a very important ship there. And I kind of similarly had a weird experience, like just in that same vibe. I remember when I got divorced, I worked with a lot of like female professionals.
Hmm.
And sometimes we'd talk about, just the cost of living, paying your bills. And I remember multiple times saying, well, why don't you just get married? Meaning like, why don't you just find a husband to pay all these bills? And so many of them
Oh
were like,
yeah.
oh, because I don't want to. I mean, I want to work my career. I want, you know, to do what I do. I don't want to marry just to sustain my lifestyle or, like pay my bills.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, that's weird. What other
That is
option is
funny.
there? Because that's just the natural progression of the JW life, high school,
Right.
pioneering, marriage.
Mm. And maybe I'll insert this video here, but there's a pretty, it's like a year old, but it's this video of an ex-JW woman, and she's, super cute, looks super young, and then you find out later on in the video, or in one of her other videos, that she has been married for 24 years.
My husband and I were both born and raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. We both had elder dads, pioneer moms. Even crazier, my childhood home was previously a kingdom hall, which is like a church. Anyway, we converted it into a house. But anyway, so Jay and I start dating. We're 17 and 19, but it was a long distance relationship. We were about a 5-hour drive apart. So every weekend he would do the drive, 5 hours, come and see me, spend the weekend. But he wasn't allowed to stay at our house. So we would always find friends or a place for him to stay every weekend. So we weren't allowed to be alone in any room. We weren't allowed to be alone in the car. We had to have a chaperone everywhere we went. This one time, my parents and Jason and I were invited to a wedding. My parents were invited to the dinner, but Jay and I were not. And this wedding was like a 2-hour drive away from our home. So picture this, Jay has already driven 5 hours. Now we get into my parents' minivan, my mom, my dad, us, and our chaperone, Kenny. So we do the drive up to the wedding. My parents go to the dinner. Jay, Kenny, and I go to dinner. Then we all go to the reception. But after, we had rented like a little cottage, and to make sure that Jay and I didn't fool around, my dad slept on his own, my mom slept with me, and you can guess where poor Jay had to sleep with Kenny. We were telling this story to our girl, and we all couldn't stop laughing. Anyways, we ended up driving back home. Great times. This is the kind of stuff that is normal in the Jehovah's Witness religion. No matter what age you are, how long you've been dating, you can hold hands, a little peck on the cheek, but nothing more than that. No touching. And if you do, and they find out, you're in big trouble. Like big, big, big trouble. Most likely you're disfellowship trouble, like disowned, shunned. Good times.
Good for them. They both got out. They both left the organization. They have kids, and they're happy family.
Yeah.
It's nuts. But yeah, right, just roll right out of high school, and you're a child essentially. In terms of, both of us were, and I was 24, and Rebecca was,
Yeah.
like I said, was 20. Both just emotionally just childlike. It was ridiculous.
Well, and when you think about like your your brain, your cortex isn't even fully developed until like you're in your early 20s, and that's the
Hmm.
part of your brain that weighs decision making with long-term consequence. So literally the important part of your brain as far as choosing your life mate is not even ready until 21 plus.
Yeah.
So the idea that every girl I knew got their diploma and they were looking for the ring immediately is just so
Mm.
Bizarre.
Well, and I remember when Rebecca and I we were dating for like 4 months, and then her cousin was constantly, where's the ring? What's going on? I was like, what are you doing, lady? She was just so, and Rebecca really wasn't that way, but the cousin was. Oh my goodness. And speaking of ridiculous things, I want to share this. I remember, first of all, that video of the woman I was just referencing. That we'll put that in here. She was also talking about how uh, chaperoning worked and how awkward that was. And it gives other Jehovah's Witnesses this sense of control in your relationship. So if I was, 23 and Rebecca's 19, we were out in public. We had driven there together in my car, and someone that we both knew, we went to a dancing class for our wedding. So we it didn't help me, but we went and we went to this dancing class and then met up with a third person. She's about 10 years older than us. She was single. And when she heard that we were in the same car, she essentially abducted my girlfriend. She just said, "Oh no, she's coming home with me now, or I'm driving her home." And I was, we're saying it, we're kids essentially, but we're legally adults, and other people in the congregation just assume they have authority to be enforcers if they disagree with how you're doing something.
The chaperoning policy is very extreme. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Hmm.
I could maybe see if you were 18 and you were going to be, alone at somebody's apartment, like watching movies. All right. When
You
you're
mean
in a
if,
public place,
as a
it doesn't
religious
matter.
type of, or as a Jehovah's Witness, you mean?
I'm sorry, repeat what you just said.
I'm sorry, were you saying that you can see having a chaperone if somebody's 18 and there's two 18-year-olds at somebody's house privately and they're both Jehovah's Witnesses, you
Right.
can see
As a
wanting to.
JW, yeah, I get
Okay,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're secluded, you're at home, you're very, very young. All right, I get that. But when I lived in Florida, this is probably 20 years ago.
Mhm.
My husband and I were out in the ministry with a brother who I'm going to estimate was in his early to mid 40s. I'm going to say 43, maybe even 45. He
Mhm.
had children in like middle school. I can't remember if his wife died or I don't know what happened to her.
He has children who need to be
Um,
chaperoned, basically.
yeah, he asked if he said, "Would you like to come bowling with me?" Neither of us were into bowling, and we were like, "Oh, thanks, but probably gonna pass." And then he said, "Well, actually, I'm dating sister so and so from our sister congregation. We want to go bowling, but we
That's a
have to
brother
have a
congregation.
chaperone."
Mhm.
This man was in his mid 40s in a public place, in a bowling alley, chaperone.
Yes,
Now,
a mid-40s man in a bowling alley needs a chaperone because he's going to give her
yeah,
the old slipperoo in the middle of between frames.
somebody's getting a gutter ball. I just think it's silly
Good
because
work.
it doesn't matter how well your chaperone gets along with you two. There's
Mhm.
just a level of comfort, getting to know someone that you're just not going to have with like a third wheel. And there's just only
Absolutely.
so much, kind of deep diving you can do into someone else's personality in a group setting. Because that's what
Mhm.
they always used to say, go on group dates, do group dates, go ride roller coasters. No, that's not a thing.
And you always had to meet separately. You couldn't be
Yeah,
driving the
everyone
same
drive their own
vehicle,
car.
and you waste a bunch of gas. You're already pioneering or something, and you meet separately to get. And in the publications, they're always like on a picnic or reading the Watchtower together, and in public and in the group settings, you never get to actually deep dive. This is why people say, "I'd like to talk to you alone," so you can actually learn some, deep
Hmm.
dive.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was
Yeah.
dating my first husband, we were in a Blockbuster video in the middle of the day
Uh-huh.
with a friend, of mine, my
Mhm.
my little brother, and then
Mhm.
a second friend that was acting as our chaperone.
Goodness.
We held hands in the Blockbuster video. And she later like took me to the side and she's like, "Hey, I don't really feel comfortable
Wow.
with you guys holding hands. I'm like, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's
But here's
amazing.
something else that I thought about today on my way to work.
Mhm.
The organization acts as if they can't trust people in their, for the sake of this argument, in their mid 40s. Mid
Mhm.
40 people cannot be trusted to control their impulses. So
Right.
they have to be safeguarded at all times, regardless of the activity. That makes sense to them. But yet, if you try to discuss the topic of CSA, they act like that is preposterous. The idea of an
Right.
adult not being able to control themselves with a minor and abusing said minor, unheard of, unfathomable, couldn't happen. So you're
Wow.
telling me one could happen but not the other?
Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. And they, first of all, don't think that it could happen. Well, if it could happen, then it certainly isn't the organization's fault for creating a situation where an older adult could be in a trusted, a ministerial servant, or an elder, or someone could be a trusted person, but they're really seeking out children. That
Yeah.
that couldn't be happening.
So I just feel like it's not that I'm against chaperones when needed, but the whole
Mhm.
reasoning behind it is just preposterous. They have often said, it's not that they'll say it's not that we don't trust, our members, of course, but for the sake of appearances,
Mhm.
it's best to safeguard your reputation by having a chaperone at the bowling
Hmm.
alley.
And then, of course, the two witness rule isn't necessary. Like if a young dating couple go into a house and are there overnight and then come out, that is considered proof that they, had sex or did something, and therefore they need to be disciplined.
Right.
But if a say, for example, a man, which usually it's men that are perpetrators, goes into a house with a small child, particularly that is not his own, that is not proof. You still need a two witness rule to
Right.
consider that man in trouble. So it's pretty ridiculous that the two witness rule only applies um, to it seems like only applies to the CSA primarily, because there's other things that are considered, proof. Yikes. That's dark.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean for it
Well,
to
we were
take
also
that
talking
turn,
about
but
what.
that was like percolating in my brain earlier today.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
I
just
hadn't
the
I hadn't
picking
really
and
thought of that.
choosing, just, ooh, that grinds my gears.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the worst. Um, we're also talking about why the governing body wants to control dating so much. And there's a little clip here. I'm going to insert it here. And it kind of shows how much David Splain thinks the governing body should be controlling dating.
What qualities do we value in a marriage mate? Spiritual qualities? Or is it mainly the physical, and we hope that the spiritual will catch up later? A young sister is getting acquainted with a young brother. He's really good looking, has a great personality, gets along with everybody. But how's he doing spiritually? Does he have a good schedule for theocratic activities, and does he stick to it? For example, if you mention an article in a recent magazine, does he often say, I must have missed that one? If that's what happens, it's a bad sign. Does he make spiritual activities a priority in his life? If he doesn't do that while he's single, what makes you think that he's going to do it after you get married? Will you change him, or will he change you?
Okay, so in that clip, we have it's you can see that there's just their hand is in everything. They definitely want to make sure that they are controlling what kind of. If it's not even talking about getting out of hand and having sex or something. He's talking about when you're looking at a prospective person to date. Um, if you ask about a Watchtower article, well, did he know it? Did he remember? Or did he go, I don't remember that. It's they want to make sure that indoctrinated people are connecting with other deeply indoctrinated people. And I think, I don't know if you can correct me on this if you think I'm wrong, I think the reason for that is that they their primary source of new recruits comes from people born in. So a new relationship of two indoctrinated people, then you're going to have, indoctrinated kids.
Sure. Yeah. Kids definitely in the last few years with all these like Caleb and Sophia videos, they're going hard after the little ones. So that's no, I think, big stretch of the imagination. Again, I think
Yeah.
that's just the natural progression. You control the child, you control the adult, you control the courtship, you control the marriage, you control the offspring. And it's just a generational thing that repeats itself. So yeah, that totally makes sense. But it also shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody. They
No.
want to stick their fingers in, your education, your finances, your entertainment. Is it any surprise that they want to pull the strings as far as like your dating life?
Right, which kind of brings me to the the funny. It's funny how much they want to pull all the strings, but they clearly, because if anybody's seen the latest governing body update, um, even the ones since the ones about women in slacks, it's okay for
Yeah.
women to wear, sisters to wear slacks and men to have beards, um, but the new one is explaining why it's okay that they made new rules about clothing and that it's okay to go along with what the governing body says, and it reinforce. Well, that shows that all the congregations that many of the congregations that heard this, there was maybe the older ones in the congregation that have been wearing suits and ties and dresses for a generation. They don't like these new rules, and their absolute control over the flock is definitely not there. They said a few years ago, even if be ready to obey governing body direction, even if from a human standpoint it doesn't make sense. And they tried saying that, and now they've done a simple thing like saying it's okay to have beards and for women to wear slacks, and they can't even maintain control over something that silly and unimportant.
I remember that just got me thinking a few years ago. This is right before I woke up. I remember going back through just zillions of old illustrations, like in the Watchtower, and
Hmm.
all the illustrations of like young witnesses gathering together just for recreational activities. Everyone is
Hmm.
in khakis. Everyone. In the new system, khakis. Dockers is blowing up. Okay. The chino pant is everywhere. So I don't know what their like what kind of axe they had to grind with jeans, like blue jeans. Um, that's definitely
Maybe they
not
had
been
like
a
a lot of
thing until
investment
just
in Banana
recently.
Republic.
What's that?
Sorry, maybe they just had a huge investment they'd made in Banana Republic back then. Um,
That
I just
tracks.
ordered a couple pairs of pants and I got some khakis and I put them on. I'm like, oh god. I literally had this thought. I felt like I was like, oh my goodness, I look like I'm posing for a picture with a panda.
Yeah. Anytime I wear khakis, I feel like I'm working at Target again.
Well, kind of back to the dating thing. I was just before we started recording here, I was talking to Rebecca, my ex-wife, Rebecca, and when we, because we're friends and we talk, and I don't know if anybody's seen the other episode, there's a linky here if you want to see it, of us talking about some other topics. But Rebecca and I were just chatting before this and talking about dating and what that was like, and we remember the time when somebody literally, the other sister from the congregation abducted her basically and said, "No, your date's over. She's coming with me." But
And
also, and she didn't mind me saying this. We got a little handsy when we were dating, and it was to the point where we were like, "Well, we better talk to." Well, mostly she was like, "We better talk to the elders because she's more righteous than me." But she's a good girl, and I wasn't very well behaved. So we didn't get, it wasn't anything crazy. It was just making out a little too heavy, and there's this and that. And the elders um, really wanted every detail,
yeah.
and it was absolutely uncomfortable for me at the time. But I was 23 or whatever, and I thought, oh, I have to submit to these elders. They're in charge. They had more authority than the police would to me. I was just like, yeah, they gotta listen to them. And I proceeded to tell them every detail. And this brings me to Rebecca's she texted me and said, let's see here. She says, it was disgusting. I swear the elders, get off hearing about stuff young people are doing that their dusty old wives won't. Like, ouch.
Love her.
She's funny, but that was what it was. Just very much, they had their notepads out, and they had these forms. They're okay, that's fine. And where did you touch? And then where? And how would you describe her? And how would you describe Jason? Oh, I'm not interested in that. I don't care about that part. It was very focused on the female side of it,
Sure.
like my perspective, which is like, oh God. And then I also know a friend of mine who has since left and is gay, and but he got himself in a little trouble before, and had sex with another man, and everybody was consenting age and everything. But then he went and confessed to the elders, and they didn't want any of the details for his judicial stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't want one bit, because it wasn't interesting to this panel of older straight men.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very telling of they don't need all those details. The elders don't need all these details.
Right.
I don't necessarily think they're getting off on them, but I think that it has the potential to go that way, and they don't need them, because in this friend of mine, in his judicial meeting, they just said, "Oh, you had sex. Okay, that's all we need to know." We'll, and then they convened and did their process with their stupid judicial committee. But it just was very telling, like I said.
Yeah, when I started dating my current husband, I was still a member, and as I've said before, he's never been a member. So, someone saw us talking, me and my boyfriend at the time, in a parking lot outside of a restaurant, and I guess they could tell by looking at him, even though he looked perfectly respectable, it wasn't anybody that they knew. They knew he was not a witness. Anyway, so they told the elders, and the elders, after a meeting on Sunday, kind of like whisked me to the back room, and they said, well, it's been brought to our attention that you seem to be in like a courtship type relationship with a non-member. Is that accurate? And like you said, you just feel like you just have to answer. Of course, now I would say that's none of your business, and I'm not answering any of these ridiculous questions. But at the time, you feel like you're talking to the cops. And so I said, yes. I mean, I was telling the truth. I said, yeah, we're dating.
I guess you were talking to the cop.
God's cop.
Her husband's cop.
More like the Gestapo. But anyway, I said, yes, we're dating. And they said, well, is it true that he's a non-believer? And I said, well, he's not a witness. I mean, he's a Christian, but he's not a witness. That answer definitely was not acceptable.
Well, that's kind of rude, because he is a believer. How dare you?
Yeah.
Just their standard is, are you a Jehovah's Witness? Oh, if you're not, then you're a non-believer.
Exactly. And of course, now I could tell them, I promise you, he knows the Bible 100 times better than anyone in that room, but it's neither here nor there. But they said, well, the standards or expectations in a worldly courtship are different. Basically, they were saying, well, because he's not a witness, he's going to expect you to put out. They were saying it in a nice way. And
oh, wow.
They said, have you been able to keep your courtship clean? And I was
the audacity.
I was so stunned. We'd only been dating, a month maybe. And I said, yes. I mean, like, why would you even ask me that? And they
just
they
the
just
assumption
acted
is
like
that
it was
everybody
totally normal.
has sex outside of marriage if they're not a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, basically, they're all sluts if they're not JWs.
Now, we're not saying that people who have extramarital sex are sluts, but yes, I see what you're saying. That was just
the point they were trying to make.
Yeah, that was the point they were making. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just, the control is nuts. And if he had been a witness and we had been dating for 1 month, they would not have
Mm.
asked me questions like that.
Yeah.
So
He's
when you get
guilty
into
by
mixed faith
being
relationships,
worldly.
it's a whole other can of worms. And
That's
in my
interesting.
experience, the elders feel like they can just say anything to you because if you're an adult, the only person they have to worry about is you. They don't have to worry about your parents. They don't have to worry about
Mm.
the family of the non-believer. So they can
Mm.
just talk to you any type of way.
It's just the arrogance that is passed down from the governing body down to the through all the ranks and then to the local elders who think they have so much power that they only it's very much like an economy. The money is only valuable because everybody thinks it's valuable.
Right.
But otherwise it's just paper. And but they have their own little economy of control, and we were feeding into it by just still being indoctrinated back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough.
It is. But I think my number one recommendation, what helped me the most in terms of getting out of the religion and then getting into being able to function as a person who dates and then finally get into a relationship, a happy relationship that I find myself in now. Therapy was of just enormous benefit.
Yeah.
And I want to also mention a note. My friend Emily, who is also a former Jehovah's Witness, has just finished going to college to become a therapist. And let's see here. She says, "This is a long road." She says, "I'm going to work as a CSWA, which is like a therapist trainee under a licensed therapist." And she's working on specializing in religious trauma and high control group recovery. So
That's
that's awesome.
incredible.
You're awesome, Emily. Love
Yeah.
it. Love you. Love that you're doing that for other people and for yourself. And I just admire, like you, Fallon, people who afterward went to school. I think that's really cool. I still got my Jethro Bodine education, but yeah.
Those bills weren't going to pay themselves, brother. Washing windows doesn't pay what it used to.